Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tell Me More, your chance to ask your burning news and election questions to the people who actually wrote that news in the first place. We are joined by the brilliant Patrick Commins, the economics editor for Guardian Australia. How are you going?
I'm going really well, thank you. How about yourself?
Going well, you know what? The news, I'm a bit confused about it, which is why I've brought you on. I think all of us have been kind of slightly shell shocked by the last couple of days and how fast everything's been moving. Um,
Yeah, tell
we've
me
got
about it.
we've got some listener questions that people have already submitted through Instagram, and if you want to ask questions, anyone watching throughout the live stream, you can either do that on the TikTok live stream or the YouTube live stream. We're in many places at once. Um, I guess to start us off, would you maybe just be able to give us the briefest rundown of what this whole tariff situation is and what happened to the stock market afterwards?
Wow, well, it's been a wild ride for about the past week. So it all started last Tuesday in the States, Liberation Day. As Trump called it, he announced that he was going to put all these tariffs on everybody. Baseline, 10% tariffs on everyone. So that's us.
Mm.
That's Norfolk Island. That's islands with penguins. It's everybody. Everyone gets 10%. And then he also said they've got this ridiculous formula. In a week's time, we're going to put even higher tariffs on countries that have a trade that kind of, that America buys more from than, they sell. So it's countries with a trade that US has a trade deficit with. That came in today. Now, this is a lot worse than everyone was expecting. And so everyone knew that he wanted to put in some tariffs. But what happened was they were much worse. Markets went into absolute kind of free fall. Wall Street had just a terrible, there's shares in New York and Wall Street had a terrible few days. We had a terrible few days. The Aussie dollar plunged. Everyone panicked. And it hasn't really recovered from there. And everyone's just wondering what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I mean, it's like never great news when the main picture of a story is just a picture of the stock market graph. Like it's been giving me very much.
That's true.
Remember during the GFC, I was in school and they were making us track shares, just happened to be as we were like learning about how the economy works. And then the GFC happened in the middle of it. So it's been quite a sort of foundational memory for me. And it's been bringing back those
Bit triggering, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I was the one who suffered the most out of the GFC.
Sure.
But speaking of the great financial crisis, that was a recession. There's been lots of talk about whether there's going to be a global recession, whether it isn't. One side of Aussie politics is saying one thing, the other's saying the other. Are we headed for a recession?
Look, in Australia, it's really hard to know because it's moving so quickly. Trump says ridiculous things every day that people panic about. It's hard to know, and also this is what he's done in the space of a week has undone about 100 years of US trade liberalization. It's this massive shock. It's a momentous moment. So of course, when these things are happening, it's very hard to know what's going to happen next. It's not going to be great. US consumers are going to spend a lot, like all the prices will go up in the States. Every imported good now is going to cost more. You can imagine what that would be like in Australia. They're suffering the same kind of, cost of living, things that we're suffering. And then you have a president who says, okay, now we're going to put up every imported price in the country. So it's not looking great in the US. It's not looking great in other countries. It's not looking great for the world economy. Could be recessions in the US. That could lead to, a downturn in global growth. What happens in Australia, it looks like, because we don't trade heaps with the US, we sell them some things, but we buy more things from them than we sell. We've got off relatively lightly in this whole thing. And that's the hope. The hope is that, we don't suffer too much from these tariffs. We can kind of go along with, we're in a good position, unemployment low, RBA can cut rates, maybe the government can step in if they need, so we should be okay. That's the basic feel now.
We've got one of the questions that was submitted from Francis Smith was, can we just circumnavigate the US? Circumvent, apologies. Can we just circumvent the US? Does it have to affect us? Or is this, is it a global thing? Like, is it hard to avoid those effects?
Yeah, it's a great question. The direct effects, those kind of, directly us trading with the US, that's not such a big deal. They'll still buy some beef, our beef, and it'll be problematic for parts of the economy. But it really is those indirect effects that we're worried about. What happens in China? I mean, they just put 100% tariffs on Chinese imports. So Chinese imports are going to be double in price. In the US, it's crazy. And so what happens to China? Maybe China has a tough time. Do they buy less of our iron ore? That matters a lot to us. It's the same with a lot of our regional kind of trading partners. So we can't really circumvent it. We're in the best, probably one of the best possible positions around the world, but we're going to be hurt because our trading partners are going to be hurt. So we can't really circumvent it. We are going to get hit. It's just a question of how bad it's going to be.
Are we in one of the best trading positions because we don't have the trade with America, or because we only got the 10%, or is it because we are a sort of raw materials exporter rather than kind of the finished manufactured goods? What is it that means that we're better off?
Yeah, it's all of those things. Yeah, it's all of those things. We sell a lot of stuff to China, iron ore and coal and so forth, and we sell a lot to other, to Japan as well, and so there are really important trading partners and really important customers. I suppose you can think about them as customers. The US is not as an important customer. It hurts if they leave, but that's right. So that's why it's not such a big deal for us. And also, we've only been hit with only 10%. That's the baseline tariff that that Donald decided he was going to hit everyone with. So we copped that. And that's lower than others like China 100%. Other Japan I think is 20%. A lot of our regional areas like 30, 40, 50. So we've kind of escaped the worst of it there.
One of the questions we had sent in as well from Instagram from our feathers was, will my groceries get more expensive or cheaper because of the tariff situation in the States? And I know that every time I try and logic it out, I feel like I come up with the opposite answer about which way it will go. Do we know what the effects will be?
Well, we got a pretty good idea. I mean, a lot of the things that we buy in the supermarket are produced locally. Bread and fruit and meat and kind of cheese and milk and a lot of our staples, fruit and veg. We're not importing it. There might be, there's probably some like exotic fruits, or at the time of the year might not be able to get avocados as cheap or something like that. I'm not sure, but generally, it's not. There's not like a situation now where we're going to face much higher prices at the supermarket, because we do produce a lot of our own food and a lot of our basic essentials that you buy in the supermarket. Now, if you went to if you were talking about maybe like TVs or those kind of things, and a lot of the stuff that we buy from China, because China's currency, we depreciate against China's currency as well. Then yeah, that stuff could get more expensive. But then again, China's going to be pretty keen to sell its stuff because they've just lost a massive customer in the US, so maybe they're going to give us some bargains. So
Yeah, I was going to say, is there
it's really
just
hard.
truckloads of TVs with a place to go now?
Yeah, and heaps of electric vehicles, and yeah, it's honestly hard to know. It honestly could end up with prices a little bit lower, which weirdly.
That
So yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of half of the course for a sort of unprecedented policy announcement, is unprecedented results. We don't really know
Yeah.
where we are. Speaking of China, someone was keen to know, AD My Lady was asking, is China in the pole seat now? Are they sort of, I mean, is this kind of opening the way for China to be the most powerful economy on earth, or does it do more harm than good? How might that change, I guess, the global balance of power?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question. To start off with, when you think about, I mean, it's going to hurt China a lot. I mean, I think they sell about 20% of their stuff, to the US, and suddenly now they've been hit with these 100% tariffs. It's really going to, do a lot of damage to China. So China's hardly a winner in, economically from this situation. But then you look across, and I'm not an international relations expert, but there is this sense that China, wants to kind of create a multipolar world where, it's not just the US and no one else. China can be a big player in the international stage. Now, if Trump is pulling the US out of the global trading system, out of, a lot of these security arrangements. He's essentially isolating the US, and he is making way for other people to step in, other powers to step in and take, more of an active role and to throw their weight around. So maybe that's right. I mean, maybe it does lead to a stronger position for China ultimately, but in the short term, they're going to suffer a lot of pain, and the government's probably going to have to bail out the economy to a fair degree in the coming months.
Is that in reference to the US or China in the bailing out when you mentioned that?
Oh, sorry, China.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Trump might do tax cuts. That's probably his next big thing. Don't worry about the tariffs. I'm giving you all tax cuts. So that might be next off the block.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's sort of interesting thinking about, like, Australia's been really kind of stuck in this conversation for 10 years or so about, like, who do we choose? Mum or dad, China or the US? And it's sort of like, they're getting divorced. Yeah, I was I'll take us back down under before we get to sort of metaphysical predicting the future. Riddy Way was really keen to know that to ask about the fact that they logged into their super and saw that it had taken a big hit. This is something a lot of people have been noticing. Is it going to hurt retirement savings? And I was keen to sort of know, should young people be worried about it, or is it only people closer to retirement? What's the situation with supers?
Yeah, I mean, it's reasonable to be worried about it. It's pretty frightening, particularly when, we're working very hard and we're trying to put this money away and we have to put it away. And then to see it go down, potentially as much as, 6, 7, 8% in the, a few days, it's stressful, right? Now, if you're younger, and you think about, and even for me, in late 40s, I've still got another 15 years, hopefully, of worry. Like I don't, I'm not even looking at my super right now. It's very exposed to shares, but I'm just like, I'll ride this cycle through. I'm not looking at it. It'll just stress me out. That's not for everyone, but that's kind of my attitude towards it.
No, I also decided that wasn't my business. That actually,
yeah, it doesn't. It's probably not helpful because anything you do in response to it is probably. It's hard to know whether it's the right thing to do. It's really hard to pick the moment to buy or sell. Experts can't do it. They've proven they can't do it. That's kind of a lot of literature about that. So don't feel like you have to do it. The best thing to do is just kind of, if you must look at it, but kind of think about, okay, yeah, but how much has it gone up in 10 years? What's my returns over 10 years? And then you think, well, it's probably been pretty good. And then in the next 10 years, it's probably going to be pretty good again. So I would just write it out. I mean, if you're close to retirement, it's a difficult thing. You might have to, it depends. It's the same thing during the GFC, and you're just about to retire, and then these things happen. It can set you back. It might mean that you need to work for another year, or you can't afford that holiday, or it can mean much worse than that. So it's a bigger deal if you're about to retire. But for young people, just try not to look at it, I reckon.
Excellent! That's great news when that happens.
Ignore it and it'll go away. It's finally true. Yeah.
What times we live in. Yeah. What times we live in are the lead up to a federal election campaign in Australia. How have both sides reacted to this? What have been the sort of messages coming from both camps?
Yeah, it's a rare bipartisan agreement, I think, on, we don't want to go, full Canada and kind of start talking tough and and putting in retaliatory tariffs and say, oh, you tax us, we'll tax you. It just doesn't work for us. It's not not to our benefit. We're just trying to keep a low profile, I think, and and both sides of politics recognize that. So in that sense, it's like I say, it's unusual that they agree, particularly during a campaign, but that is where they agree. They disagree on other things. Now. Yeah, so I suppose that's it. And then but then there's political tactics and there's politics around that as well. And if you'd like to talk about that as well. Yeah.
You led me directly into it, which is I was keen to sort of know who benefits from this in an election campaign. Is it, the party that from the outside who could be the change that we wanted, or is it, that that's their sort of message of like we need the change in Australia, or because it's an external pressure, do we go more the devil we know, or not the devil we know, but the party we know, in fact? Who comes out on top in the Trump world?
Yeah, well, I think when things are, when there's a bit of a, when people are worried, or when there's like such a massive global thing happening overseas, and there's lots of bad news, there's a lot of benefit in being, of incumbency, of being the government. I think people would tend to, psychologically just stick with, like you say, stick with the people they know. They don't want to risk a change because there's a lot going on. They're worried with, a bit of an unknown quantity. When you're the government, you can stand up like Jim Chalmers said, I spoke to the RBA governor this morning, and we're doing blah, blah. And you can kind of look like you're a bit more in control, whereas in the opposition, you can kind of just cut from the sideline. So I think it works. It works in Labor's favour in that sense. And then you kind of have Labor trying to tar Peter Dutton with the MAGA brush, saying that, and Peter Dutton's talked a little bit about kind of, or the party members have, talked about kind of education, and, the kids aren't, they didn't say brainwashing. What did they say? They just kind of brought up some of the themes that have been kind of touched on in MAGA as well, and it kind of opened them up to a bit to this attack. So, but do people pay too much attention? Do people really equate Peter Dutton with Donald Trump? I don't think so. I don't think that's right. So he hasn't been a full-throated MAGA supporter or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so in as much as there is definitely a political tactic from Labor to draw the connections to Dutton, so potentially in as much as that has worked, that could disadvantage Dutton given that Trump has done this stuff, but we're not completely sure how well that's worked in terms of a political tactic.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure how well it's really worked. I mean, I think Jim Chalmers was making some jokes about, Angus Taylor and his Doge, evoking Elon Musk because he wanted to cut, the public service. So, but yeah, I think it's pretty marginal. I don't think, speaking to some, some staffers from the Prime Minister's office today, and they're like, I don't know whether that really plays in our favour that much. So, yeah.
I've seen it reflected online, but also I'm very aware that not all online circles are representative of the broader public. Where the sort of what 22-year-olds think on TikTok is the consensus.
But I think Australians don't like Trump. I mean, I think a majority of Australians don't like Trump. So theoretically, if you could say, oh, this guy likes Trump and he's a Trump light, makes sense as a tactic, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know how much it really sticks.
You mentioned before, and we've had some sort of people asking a little bit about it. Oh, actually, sorry, I've just seen a question coming that I now really want to ask, which is, what does this do for AUKUS, the submarine situation? Do we have any sense of that? This is an entirely curveball, so it's all right if you we don't know at this point. But yeah, is this the conversation where we really start seriously talking about pulling out, which has been a bit of a non-starter up until now?
I don't think we're seriously going to start talking about pulling out just because we're so invested in it. We've already spent a lot of money. I mean, it's such a core part of our defence strategy now that, it's not something that you just pull out of on a whim. Leader of the Greens, Adam Bant, was at the press club today. He was saying AUKUS has to be called into question now. We're going to be dragged in with this, dragged along with the US into some Donald Trump war or something, so but they've never been keen on AUKUS. But so I think that's generally swirling around in the background. Trump kind of, a few weeks ago, someone asked him about AUKUS and he was like, what's that? So I think a lot of the worries is that, I think more people are more worried that the US won't follow through on its commitments to AUKUS. Rather than people talking about junking it, as far as I can see so far. Yeah.
Yeah,
But it doesn't. Yeah, it's a bit of a worry. We're tying ourselves closer with the US, but I mean, Trump's not going to be there forever. It's a long-term
Yeah.
deal. So,
Well, yeah, the submarines might take longer to build than the
yeah, decades.
administration.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, we've actually, someone on TikTok, Fanto, asked, which I thought was interesting, could China tariff Australia because of how close allies we are with the US? Is there any sense that we could sort of get, catch strays that way as well?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's on the agenda. We did get that trade aggression from China after during the COVID pandemic, and that was because we wanted an investigation into where COVID came from, and that pretty much went China, and we banned Huawei. There were other things going on, and that was more kind of that us arguing with the Chinese authorities around stuff. I don't think we're going to catch any flack from the US-China trade war. I think, as I mentioned earlier, rather than kind of making it harder for us to deal with each other, it could make it easier because China's going to be keen to find other markets. And one of the things of US pulling itself out, then other areas try to kind of come together a little bit more and to alleviate the stress by finding making it easier to trade with each other. And there's talk now about reviving the trade deal with the European Union, which fell over. So I think no. So no, I don't think so. Is the bottom line. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, one bit of good news out of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Someone else on TikTok has asked, I can't see their name, unfortunately, is it an astronomically bad time to buy a house because of all of this, what's going on?
No, I don't think it's an astronomically bad time to buy a house. It would, if any, I mean, so now they're talking. So one of the big things that affects movements in the house prices, at least in the short term, is what is borrowing costs, the cost of a loan, and what the RBA, the Reserve Bank, does there, affects the cost of a loan a lot. And what the economists are saying now is that the RBA is more likely to cut rates. In other words, mortgages are likely to be more cheaper, in the coming year than they were before all this Trump deal, because.
Can you explain why that is? I think that's something that certainly took me sort of 10 minutes of reading to figure out why. Why is it that sort of economic uncertainty almost makes them more likely to cut rates?
Yeah, because the Reserve Bank uses its kind of interest rate tool as a way to speed up or slow down the economy, with an eye on inflation. Now, if they think the economy is going to be slowing down more than they thought, or they think inflation is going to be coming off more, then they will. So if the economy is slowing, then they're like, oh, we need to kind of take our foot off the brake a little bit, so they'll cut rates. So all of this uncertainty, they were probably going to cut anyway in May, in next month. And now, because there's so much more uncertainty, and really it's not great for the economy, what's happening overseas, and there's a lot of uncertainty, it makes them more likely to cut rates and maybe to cut more rates, cut further this year. So they cut rates to help the economy. If they think the economy is going to be in more trouble, then they'll give it a bit of a kick along by cutting rates. So with that in mind, if they do cut rates more quickly, you'll be able to get a cheaper loan. The downside of that, of course, is that house prices go up, faster. So I don't think it's an astronomical.
Already owned a house.
That's right. It's a great time to have owned a house for 20 years. No, isn't it always? But no, what I'm saying is, yeah. So I don't think it is an astronomically bad time to buy a home. Is probably when we might be just you might be worried that you're going to lose your job. There's nothing worse than that is the most terrible thing when you have a mortgage and you don't have a job and you don't have the income. So are we worried about a big rise in unemployment? People, no, I don't think so. So nope, I don't think it's an astronomically bad time to buy a home.
For sure. And look, just because we do have a little spare second, I was keen to ask you this, partially just out of my own interest, but also I've seen some people quite confused about this as well, which is at the same time that we're hearing that we're, directly from Chalmers, that, we're one of the best placed countries when it comes to this tariff, we're also seeing the Aussie dollar plummet in value compared to the US dollar, which I think people have found confusing given isn't the US the one in trouble? So how does that work?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I've been asked this question a lot, actually. And it is interesting, isn't it? Because it doesn't seem like the US is getting punished, does it? It seems like we're getting punished. That's not fair. But so look, the US. So the number one thing to remember is that US is like a global financial superpower. They're the reserve currency, which means that they've got the biggest and baddest currency. They've got the biggest. Everyone when things get tough, there's a rule of thumb in financial markets. You go for where, the safe place to put your money. Safe place is still the US. It does, even though they're basically, trying to drive their own economy into the ground at the moment, because they are such a big part of the global financial system. They're still the safe haven asset. I know that sounds weird. It's kind of hard to get your head around, but they still are the safest place to put your money as far as the world's financial markets are concerned. So when things are looking a bit rough, even if it is caused by the US, there's this rule of thumb in the financial markets when you go and you buy US debt or something, US bonds, which sends the US dollar up. And then on the other hand, because we're everyone knows that we're heavily dependent on what happens in China, big commodity play. If the world economy slows down, we tend to go with it because so we get punished a bit. So they're looking at China, what's going to happen in China. They're looking at global growth. And they say, you sell the Australian dollar because those guys always get, have a bit of trouble. But it's real. I think it's So it's those kind of things that are happening at the moment. I hope that makes sense.
So
because it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's about, because people are expecting a slowdown potentially in manufacturing from China, and we sell the iron ore for them to do the manufacturing, that potentially there wouldn't be as much demand. But then that also doesn't necessarily affect the economy internally. This is now just me genuinely asking questions. Everyone pretend like I'm asking I kind of know and I'm leading it, but also
No, that is true. But then you'd also think the same would be the case, because the US is going to have a real tough time because they've just done all these imports. So it's beyond kind of like fundamentals of your economy is going to do worse, so your dollar's not going to be as strong. With the US, it's a special case. It's a very special case that when traders all around the world are worried that things are going bad, they buy US assets, and that sends up the US dollar. It doesn't make sense in a kind of in a kind of a fundamentals, their economy is not going to be hurt by this. It does make sense when you think about, most of the world's assets, a big chunk of them sit in the US, and it's a big, safe, juggernaut of a market. So even though things can get a bit rough on the surface, there's this big ballast there that people go, I'm still going to buy US assets. And it's a funny thing. And that's, but that does explain it as much as I can.
Yeah, maybe I might just put the correlation between the economy and currency in the not my business basket along with my super fund currently.
And the Aussie dollar is, it's down a lot. I mean, it's below 60 cents. So it's a big deal. It's moved a lot. But it really does speak more about what's happening overseas and in financial markets and what's happening in the Australian economy.
Yeah, so it's more everyone else moving rather than us just.
Yeah, it's someone in London. It's someone in London, going, oh, this is happening. Oh, or it's an algorithm because, markets are just governed by bots now, so they're like, oh, this did this, so sell the Aussie. That's a great rendition of how it all works.
For sure. Yeah. Well, with that, I might let you go. And
on a high note.
Well, at least the high note is it doesn't spell doom for our economy. So I'll take the positives from that. Thank you so much. This has been just the best convo. I'm so excited that I got to definitely not just ask my economic questions in a sort of disguise of answering the public.
No, it's been really fun. Thank you so much. And thanks for all the questions that came in.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.